As we're aware, strings must be written within quotes. Let's see what happens when we create a variable and put quotes inside of the string. In this example, we've placed quotes around the word players in our sentence. If we go ahead and preview this file in our web browser, we can see here that the text does not output as it should. To eliminate this issue, we need to use the \escape character. We must put one before the initial quote and one over here. Now when we save the file and refresh our web browser, we can see that the sentence correctly displays with quotations around the word players. And that is how you deal with special characters that you have issues with in JavaScript output. We can use JavaScript functions to generate a random number. This can be done using the math.random function. This function will generate a number between 0 and 1. Let's take a look at how it works using this example script. Here, we're using the getElementById output method to output a random number. And there's the math.random function. Let's go ahead and save the file and preview it in our web browser. Here, we can see a random number is generated. If we refresh the page, it'll generate different random numbers. The value is always between 0 and 1. We can use the math.min or math.max function to find the lowest or highest value in a list of arguments. This example script provides an illustration of how this works. Here, we have a list of numerical values. We can use the math.min function to locate and output the lowest value. In this case, the math.min function should output -150. Let's test this in our web browser to see if it works. We can see in our web browser that -150 is in fact outputted. But what if we wanted to see the maximum value listed in this sequence of numbers? In that case, all we have to do is update min to max, save the file, and refresh. Now we have the highest value in that list, 600. We can round decimal numbers to the nearest integer using the math.round function. In this example, we use the math.round function to round the value of 15.4 to the nearest integer. Since the value after the decimal is below 0.5, the number will be rounded to 15. We can test this in our web browser to confirm the results. This is the output in our web browser, and we can see that 15.4 has been rounded to 15. Now, if we update the value to 15.6, the number will be rounded to 16. To specify whether the value should be rounded up or down, we can use the math.ceil or math.floor function. Let's go ahead and specify that we want 15.6 to be rounded down, so we'll change it to math.floor. After saving the file and refreshing the page, we can see that it now rounds down. If we wanted to round it up to 16, we can specify that by putting math.ceil. And once we refresh the web browser, we can see that the value has now been rounded up to 16. JavaScript arrays are used to store multiple values in a single variable. In this example, we've created an array variable called fruits and stored 6 values into it. Each value contains the name of a fruit. The 6 values we have are apple, orange, pear, grape, tangerine, and mango. In order to output a specific value in the array, we can refer to it using an index number. The index number starts with 0. The first item in the array is identified by the index number 0, in this case, apple. If the index number was 1, we would be referencing orange, and so on. Since we've used an index number of 0, when we preview this in our web browser, we'll see that the word apple is displayed. This is the first item in the array. If we change the index number to 3, we'll see that the word displayed in our web browser changes to grape. And that's how we reference individual items in the array. In the situation where we wanted to display the number of items in the array, so for example, here we have 6 items, we can use the length property. We've used the length property before. And when we save the file and refresh the page, we can see that the number 6 has been outputted because there are 6 items in the array. There are many ways that the values in an array can be outputted. We can output each value in the array by using the toString method. To do so, simply type in toString and an open and close bracket. I'll save the file and we'll preview this in our web browser. And we can see here that each item in the array has been outputted. You'll also notice that each value is separated by a comma. If you want to specify the separator, use the join method. In this case, we'll specify that we want an asterisk as the separator. Keep in mind that the asterisk is contained within an open and closed quotation, and we've also included an individual space before and after the asterisk. So after you've saved your file, refresh your web browser, and you'll see that the separator has now changed. We can remove the last element of an array from being outputted by using the pop method. In this case, the last element is mango. This will no longer be presented in our output. As you can see in our web browser, mango is not outputted. In order to remove the first word instead, or the first element, we can use the shift method. Now when we save our file and refresh our web browser, you'll see that mango reappears, but apple has been removed. To add a new element to the end of an array, we can use the push method. In this case, we'll add the word cherry to the very end of our output. And you can see that we now have a new element that has been outputted. To add a new element to the beginning of an array, we can use the unshift method. We can see that the element cherry has now been added to the beginning of the array. Array elements can be changed using the index number. Let's change the first element of our array to kiwi. We'll start off with the name of the array, fruits, and then specify the index number corresponding to the value we want to amend. And that's it. Once we save our file, we can preview it in our web browser. And we can now see that the first value, apple, has been amended to kiwi. If we were to change the index number, let's say to 3, and save our file and refresh, we can see that grape has now changed to kiwi. We can also delete elements in an array using index numbers as well. Let's delete pear from our list of elements. Since pear would have the index number 2, we can type the following. We'll save our file. And in our web browser, we can now see that there is an empty space where pear would have appeared. The splice method can be used to add multiple new items to an array. This method also allows us to specify the position of the new element and also if any elements should be removed. Let's go through an example to better illustrate this concept. Say we wanted to add 2 fruits, lemon and banana, after the second element in our array, which is orange. To do this, we can type the following. We start with the variable name, and then we create our splice method. The value 2 indicates that we want the new elements to start with an index number of 2. The 0 indicates that we do not want to remove any of the other elements in our array. Once we save our file and preview it in our web browser, we can see that lemon and banana have been added after orange. Lemon does have an index value of 2, so the output is correct. We can sort an array alphabetically using the sort method. This sample script includes an array variable named cars. There are 4 elements in the array: Volvo, Acura, Honda, and Lexus. Let's go ahead and add the sort method into the script to sort the elements alphabetically from A to Z. We start with the variable name, cars, and then enter the sort method. We'll save our file and preview it in our web browser to make sure it worked. We can see here that each array element is now sorted in alphabetical order. We can also reverse sort the elements in an array using the reverse method. To do so, simply type the following line of code into your script. Now when we refresh the page, you'll notice that each element item is in reverse order. We can join 2 arrays using the concat method. In this sample script, we have 2 arrays, one named girls and the other boys. The girls array has 4 elements: Julie, Samantha, Laura, and Jill. The boys array has 5 elements: Bob, Joe, Walt, Sam, and Fred. The third variable is named combined. This variable will store the element values of both arrays using the concat method. To output these values, we can use our getElementById output method. Let's go ahead and preview this file in our web browser to see what the output looks like. Here, we can see that the elements of both arrays have been outputted as we intended. When programming in any language, it's very common to create logic that performs different actions based on one or more conditions. JavaScript has a variety of conditional statements that we'll explore in this lesson. We'll be exploring the if, else, and else-if statements. These statements allow us to execute an action contained within a block of code if certain conditions are met. Let's take a look at how this works with a simple example. We'll create a script that converts a student's numerical test score into a letter grade. To keep it simple, we'll assume the test was out of 100 marks. First, we need to define the grading system. Let's say that a score of 0 to 49 equals an F. 50 to 69 equals a D. 70 to 79 equals a C. 80 to 89 equals a B. And 90 to 100 inclusive, equals an A. In order to do this, we need to start by creating our test score variable and assigning a value. We'll call the variable score, and we'll assign a value of 65 for now. Keep in mind that we'll make changes to this score to test our script later on. Next, we'll need to start with our first if statement. If the score is less than 50, we want to output an F. So start by typing if score is less than 50, we will output an F using the document.write method. If the score is greater than 50 but less than 70, we want to output a D. Since we're adding a condition to our original if statement, we must start this condition with the else if statement. I'll copy this else if statement because we're going to create a few others. So the next one we need is if the score is greater than 70 but less than 80, we want to output a C. This is for if the score is greater than 80 but less than 90, we'll output a B. And if the score is greater than 90 or equal to 100, we want to output an A. Now, the last thing we want to do is if the score is anything above 100, we need to display an error message indicating that the score must be less than 100 because the exam was out of 100 marks. For this, we'll use the else statement. The else statement instructs the script on what to do if none of the preceding conditions have been met. And I'll go ahead and save this file and preview it in our web browser. So here we have D that has been outputted because our current score, we've set it to 65. Now that is greater than 50 and less than 70. So if we were to change our score, let's go ahead and change the score to 81. And in this case, it correctly outputs a B because that's over 80, but less than 90. Now let's see what will happen if we create a score above 100. Okay, so our else statement is working. The score must be less than 100. And so you can go ahead and play with that, but that's basically how the if, else if, and else statements work, also known as conditional statements. Comparison operators are used to compare the equality or difference between variables or values. There are several comparison operators that can be used in JavaScript. This chart provides an overview of each one. We'll go through a few of them to demonstrate how they work. In this test script, we've created a variable and assigned it a value of 6. We'll use the getElementById method to output a true or false result when using different comparison operators to compare our variable value with another value. Let's start with our equal to operator. Let's test to see if our variable value is equal to 8. We know that this is not the case, so our script should output the word false when we test it in our web browser. So I'll save this file and just test it in the browser. And we can see that it does in fact output the word false. If we were to change the value to 6, then and refresh our web browser, the output is true because our variable value x is in fact equal to 6. We can use the not equal operator to see if our variable is not equal to 10, for example. This is the symbol for not equal. We'll update the 6 to 10. So we know that our variable value 6 is not equal to 10. So when we test this in our web browser, it should display true, which it does. Now if we were to change this to 6, it should display false because our variable value is in fact equal to 6. You can test out the remaining comparison operators and see what the outcome produces. The Boolean function can be used to find out if an expression or variable is true. As a general rule, everything with a real value is true. This includes both numerical and string data. Anything without a real value is false. Let's take a look at an example. In this script, we have 7 variables declared, b1 to b7. Each variable uses the Boolean function to test whether a specified value is true. Using the getElementById method, we can output the data. Let's take a look at this page in our web browser to see the results. We can see in our browser that all the numbers, including 80, 2.6, -10, are true. The same goes for variable b6, which contained the equation. The strings included in variable b4 and b5 are also true. The last variable, variable b7, which contained the value 0, is false. A for loop allows us to execute a block of code repeatedly. They come in handy if you want the same code to run over and over again, each time with a different value. Let's take a look at an example to illustrate how for loops work. The objective of the for loop we create will be to output the values 0 to 10 on separate lines in our HTML document, as shown here. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we need to do is declare the variable that will contain our initial values. We'll call this variable count. Now we can create our for loop. To do so, type the following block of code. And that's it. In this block of code, we first established the for loop. Next, we've defined the parameters of the for loop. We've set the initial value for variable count to 0. We then instruct the script that the value should increment by 1 up to a maximum of 10. The document.write functions simply output each value in the loop separated by a line break. So let's go ahead and save this file and test it in our web browser to make sure it works. And we can see here that each value is outputted onto a separate line, just as we instructed it to do. Now let's see what would happen if we were to change the value of our count variable to a different value. I'll change it to 3 Save the file and refresh. Now we can see that our initial value starts at 3 and increments up to 10. We can increase our maximum value by changing 10 to 20, for example. And now it'll keep looping until it reaches 20 instead of 10. The JavaScript for in loop loops through the properties of an object. In this example script, we've created an object variable called person. The object contains 3 elements: fname, lname, and age. The for in loop will loop through each item of the object and output the data. Let's go ahead and test this in our web browser to see the result. We can see that each item in the object has been outputted: John Smith and 30. The while loop will loop through a block of code as long as the specified condition is met. Let's take a look at an example. We'll create a script that outputs the values of a variable as long as the value does not exceed 20. We will start by creating a variable to store our initial value. We'll call this variable I. We'll assign the value 0 to this variable. Now we can create our while loop. Here, we've instructed our script to output the value of I as long as the value does not exceed 20. The while loop will loop over and over 19 times in this case. Each time it will output the value of I started at 0 and incremented by 1. So let's go ahead and save this file and preview it in our web browser. So we can see that the value starts at 0, that's the initial value of I, and it's incremented by 1 up until 19. We can modify our script. If we adjust our maximum value to 40, we can now see that it goes up to 39. We can also adjust the value of I if we wanted to start the incrementing at 5. And that is how the while loop works. The do-while loop is a variation of the while loop. A do-while loop will always execute the entire code block once before checking if a condition is met. If the condition is met after the first pass, it will then loop the code block as long as the condition remains true. Let's take a look at an example to illustrate this. On this HTML page, we have a JavaScript function that's executed when a button is clicked. We can see the onClick event in our button element that triggers the function named myFunction. The function in our JavaScript tag starts with defining a variable named I with an initial value of 0. Then we have the syntax for our do-while loop. This loop will start by outputting the value of I and incrementing it by 1. It will continue to loop and increment as long as the value of I is less than 10. We can see this condition defined in our while parameter. Let's click the button to see the result. We can see the loop starts at 0, because that's the initial value of I. The value of I is then incremented. It is incremented until the value of I reaches 9, which is less than 10. Now let's see what would happen if we were to change the initial value of I to 11. We can see that the output is now 11. This is because the loop executed once, but it does not execute again because this condition is no longer met after the first pass. We can use the JavaScript break and continue statements to either exit a loop or skip an iteration of a loop. Let's start with the break statement. In this example, we've declared a variable I. Next, we have a for loop that sets the initial value of I to 0 and defines our loop to execute as long as I remains under 10, so from 0 to 9. We then have an if statement that will stop the loop if the value of I hits 3, and that's what the break statement allows us to do. In our web browser, we can confirm that the loop did stop when I hits 3. You can see it, we only have the value 0, 1, and 2 outputted. If we replace the break statement with a continue statement, we can skip an iteration of the loop when the value is equal to 3. The loop will continue as normal after the skipped iteration. So you can see that we go to 0, 1, 2, 3 is skipped, and then the loop continues onward until the value 9. You can use JavaScript functions to create blocks of code that perform particular tasks when called upon. Let's take a look at an example to illustrate how functions work. Here in our script tags, we've defined a function called myFunction. This function has two parameters, A and B. You can call your function anything you like. The name can contain letters, digits, underscores, and dollar signs. The code to be executed inside the function is placed within a set of curly brackets. In this case, the function is meant to output the value of A multiplied by B. To do this, we use a return statement. It's important to note that a function will stop executing once it reaches the return statement. The values of A and B are contained in our inner HTML function, in this case 8 and 2. These values are known as arguments. They define the values of the parameters inside the function, in this case A and B. And you can see that we've referred back to the function name as well before inserting our arguments in the brackets. We can see in our web browser that the arithmetic was performed, as 8 times 2 is 16. One of the key benefits of functions is they can be used as many times as needed with different arguments to produce different results. For example, to multiply different values in place of 8 and 2, simply update the arguments. Now we're multiplying 6 and 5, and you can see that the output is correct, 30. We can use different types of events in our HTML document to execute JavaScript code. There are many different types of events, but some common events include mouse clicks, mouse overs, mouse out, key down, and document load. Let's take a look at a basic on-click event. In our sample HTML file, we have a button element that will display the time when clicked. In this case, the event is the click, and the function that is triggered is the date function. We've used the inner HTML statement to display the output. You can see in our web browser when I click the time button, the date is displayed, the date and time. We can change on click to on mouse over. And now the function will be triggered when I hover my mouse over the button. I don't need to click. If we change it to on mouse out, the date will be displayed once my mouse is out of the button area. Now that we have a better understanding of how JavaScript works, it would be a good time to work on a couple of projects. First, we'll start with a simple script that changes the background color of a web page every time the page is refreshed. We can see the end result in this example. Every time I press the refresh button, you can see that the background color is changing. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing you need to do is set up your basic HTML page structure and save the file on your computer. Next, create your script tags inside the body tags. Inside our script, we need to define a variable that stores all the possible background colors in an array. So here we have a variable called bgcolor, and it stores 8 values inside an array. And each value is a hex code representing a different color. You can use the same colors we've used or different colors if you like. Now we'll need to create the JavaScript statement that will randomly select one of the colors in our array and apply it as the background color each time the page is refreshed. So to do that, we've used the document body style property and set it to a randomized value in the bgcolor array index. The value of the index is derived by multiplying a random value between 0 and 1, and that's done using the math.random statement. We've multiplied it by the length of the array, which is 8. We then use the math.floor statement to round the value to the nearest whole number. So this gives us the value of our index number in the bgcolor array. And each time it's going to be different. So that means each time the background color will be different as well. And that's it for the script. Once you're done, just save the file and preview it in your web browser.